his experiences. And thank you so much to Leigh-Ann Davis, who's been patiently waiting. And I'm really sorry for the overrun in time. Leigh-Ann will run the next and the final session here. She's a director of criminal justice initiatives at the ARC of the United States, creating pathways to justice for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities in the US and internationally is what she will be talking about today. And of background, Leigh-Ann Davis is Director of Criminal Justice Initiatives at the ARC of the United States and directs the ARC's National Center on Criminal Justice and Disability. With 25 years of experience working at the intersection of intellectual developmental disability and criminal justice, Ms. Davis continually strives to build stronger lines of open communication and understanding between these two worlds. She has authored numerous publications and presents nationally and internationally on a broad array of criminal justice and disability topics. In 2013, she worked with the ARC to secure funding and fulfill a long-term dream to create NCCJD, the first national center in the US to adequately address both victim and defendant issues, and oversaw the development of the NCCJD signature training pathway to justice. As the ARC subject matter expert related to criminal justice and disability issues, she is often interviewed by national media outlets and provides consultation to a number of federal agencies and nonprofit agencies. Ms. Davis works from a home office in Arlington, Texas, and holds a BSW, Bachelor of Science in Social Works, Master of Science in Social Works, and Masters of Public Administration from the University of Texas at Arlington. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Charlotte. And I am very excited to be here to get a chance to get with like-minded people in our world on criminal justice issues. I'm a big cheerleader for us gathering in this way because so much of this work we feel like we do alone. And it's something that's hard to find funding for. Yeah. It's hard to get everyone kind of on the same page around some of these issues. So this is so important to have opportunities like this to talk together. So I'm very excited that I got invited. So thank you to the organizers for that. And I will get started and just give you some information about the ARC, about what we're doing in criminal justice issues. And hopefully, if I don't take too long talking, we'll have some time for Q&A as well.
Excellent. I will leave you to it.
Okay, thank you. So I wanted to give you just a little bit of an agenda of what I'll be talking today about. And the focus of our this presentation is on how we can create pathways to justice for people with IDD. And that is intellectual and developmental disabilities. And this work is focused here in the US, but we have been doing work with international work as well, and I'll touch on that too. So I'll talk a little bit about what our National Center is and does, then talk about the importance of data in this field, some challenges in the criminal justice system, and look at some solutions as well. So for those of you who may not be familiar with the ARC, we are the largest NGO in the US that serves people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Our mission is to promote and protect the rights of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And the goal is full inclusion. We have policy, program, and legal advocacy at the ARC of the US with 600 chapters across the country. And our national office is located in Washington, DC. But as Charlotte mentioned, I work from a home office in Texas. And also, as Charlotte mentioned, it has been a number of years that I've been working in the field, 26 years, really focused at that intersection of people with IDD who come in contact with the criminal justice system. And for many years, we had looked at ways to create a national center that could house all of this information in one place, sort of like a clearinghouse of information. So even though that was a goal, it wasn't until 2013 that we were able to secure funding through the federal government here to create a national center that could really look at this specific population of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities that come in contact with the criminal justice system. And through that work, we have been able to advocate at that intersection of both criminal justice reform while also seeking to advance disability rights. And we work on both victim issues as well as those who are facing charges. It's very important to look at both sides of this issue, and we seek funding and to do projects in both areas. So we have a broad portfolio of projects and contracts right now with 2 full-time staff and 1 consultant. So not a large amount of people, but we do quite a bit of work with that. And we serve a number of different target audiences, including people with disabilities, disability advocates, a broad array of criminal justice professionals as well. And our goal is also to really support our chapter affiliates. As I mentioned, we have 600 chapters throughout the country, and we really want them to be the go-to resource in their communities around this topic. This gives you just a little bit more information about what our National Center does. The training and technical assistance is key, working with, as I said, law enforcement, attorneys, victim assistance professionals, first responders. We really want to get this information about disability to key people in the field who can help identify and then respond effectively. We also provide information and referral throughout the country, so people can call in that have disabilities or family members, and also criminal justice folks to ask questions or ask about training. We want to provide as much information as we can and be the go-to resource for that as well. We also have done a number of different publications and policy briefs on different key topics affecting this population. And we try to provide as much information through webinars and conferences and through our social media here at the ARC. So I kind of mentioned this a little bit already, but I cannot overemphasize the importance of research in this area and how that and having strong data can really drive funding, which then drives sustainable change within this field. So to that point, I wanted to share a couple of key data points that we often share here in the US around how often people with IDD are in our criminal justice system. So here is some data from the Bureau of Justice Statistics that looks at how many people with disabilities are in prison or are in jail. So from this picture here that shows both on the right and on the left, sort of different colored of individuals who kind of represent the percentage of people in jail and prison. On the left side, it shows 2 in 10 prisoners. And then on the right side, it shows 3 in 10 jail inmates report having a cognitive disability. And when looked at different types of disability, they found that those with cognitive disabilities are the most commonly reported type of disability. And I did add here what that definition means. So cognitive can include people with Down syndrome, autism, dementia, learning disabilities, intellectual disability, and traumatic brain injury. So while this is still a pretty broad array of disability, it does start to give us a picture of just how often people with these types of disabilities are in our prisons and are in our jails. We also know that there's an issue around people with disabilities giving false forced confessions. And so we have a data point on that here. And then some barriers to justice to consider include the disability going unrecognized or being dismissed as irrelevant. People can face higher rates of arrest or conviction as well. And often that they're not able to be involved in programs because they're inaccessible. So thinking about all of those issues is critical to providing the equal access to justice in the system. Another area to look at is people who are victimized that have disability. So this data again comes from in the US, our Bureau of Justice Statistics. We know that people with cognitive disabilities face the highest rates of violent victimization. And another data point that came out more recently around this is that people with intellectual disability are 7 times more likely to experience sexual assault compared to those without disabilities. And some barriers to justice we often bring up around this is that reports of victimization are often not believed. People aren't believed or provided with the accommodations they need to be able to report or talk about or even ask about how to report if victimization is happening. These cases can go unprosecuted, especially if there's a communication challenge involved. And this can be due to either training not being available or people not feeling comfortable because they don't know how to work with victims with disabilities. And again, the inaccessible services and supports. An example of that is just looking at local rape crisis centers, for example, and asking, will they even bring in people with disabilities, or will they say we don't work with people with disabilities because we don't have the services or we don't know how? So that is within the US against our Americans with Disabilities Act, which says that services and supports must be made available to people with disabilities. So that's one of the key points that we bring out in our training. And of course, we cannot have this conversation without looking at the intersection of race and people with disabilities as well. So I wanted to bring in a couple of data points around that. We know that between 1/3 and 1/2 of people that are shot and killed by police in the US have a disability. And then when we look at some data from the American Journal of Public Health, we found that young people with disabilities were 13% more likely to be arrested than peers without disability. But then when we look at Black youth with disabilities, that actually jumps to 17%. So this is a key issue as well, looking at not only people with disabilities, but that intersection where people are more marginalized in our society. And one of the things we like to ask here at our National Center to those that we train and that we provide education to, and as we think about policy, is how are we reaching the person least likely to be heard, to get services, to be seen in our society as needing those services. We have to think about that intersection because so often those individuals are completely even left out of our data or even seen within our society as needing the support. So let's look a little bit at the common challenges that people with intellectual developmental disabilities may face in our criminal justice system. And this information comes from the International Association of Chiefs of Police, which is the largest membership organization of law enforcement here in the United States. And we've worked with them around creating and revising their model policies on this issue. So some of the interactions that were brought out in this include people with disabilities being used by criminals without disabilities without their knowledge or unknowingly. I had already mentioned that false confessions can be a real concern as well. People may seem to have either offensive or suspicious behavior to law enforcement. It can be misinterpreted or misunderstood, which can create some real serious issues, and it can escalate situations. Or it can, on the other hand, it could seem strange to the officer or to others in the court system or whoever that the person may be working with. Another issue is wandering. So people with autism, for example, we have data here in the US that shows how often children with autism, when they wander, that they may wander to bodies of water, which then can lead to drowning. And so this has been brought out within the US. And we're currently working on a project that's looking at how do we balance autonomy around for adults, for example, in wearing locative technology or devices that can help create safety, but at the same time balancing the fact that people with disabilities also deserve autonomy and that they decide what kind of technology or what kind of devices that they might want to wear. And we can provide more information on that for those interested. And then also just seizures and other physical situations that can occur that police need to keep in mind as they are interacting with people with disabilities. So in another way of looking at it, I think the challenge that we have to think about is how are we creating equal access to justice for people with disabilities? So as we peel apart those layers, what we can think about is what is causing the issue to begin with. And one of the first things that we look at is that persistent bias. So bias that people with disabilities experience in our society, which then of course is going to happen within the criminal justice situations as well. So people not understanding or stereotyping a person with a disability. For example, we had talked about victimization. So someone with a disability not being seen as credible simply because they have a disability. And those in the criminal justice system, and especially our legal system, not understanding that people with disabilities can provide credible testimony and they can do what others do with supports, with the appropriate accommodations, and making sure that those are provided. So that bias then can create a lack of knowledge about disability, which then can flow into people having a lack of experience because of the fear of not knowing, then not building that knowledge base, and then not getting the experience they need to really work closely with people with disabilities. So unequal access to justice means that we have too many people in our criminal justice system that have disabilities. This can mean that they can also be more likely to be victims of crime, but they can also more likely be victims of our criminal justice system as well. And we know that they're more likely to be arrested, convicted, and serve longer sentences. And the more that we can get strong data on these points, the more that we can build the reason behind why we need to have strong policies related to those in the system that have disability. So what are some solutions to think about? One of the things that the center has created, as I mentioned earlier, is our Pathways to Justice training. And I do want to make sure that it's clear that we know that training alone doesn't change everything. Training is one piece of the solution, but it's not the entire solution. So one of the things that we built into our Pathways training is that we start by creating what's called a disability response team. So this team gets together before the training day to talk about what are some key issues that that community sees as people with disabilities encounter the criminal justice system. And that team actually works with us to provide a training in their community about people with IDD. And within the team, you have to have at least a person with a disability advocate, a law enforcement officer, a victim service provider, and an attorney. So we really try to get a broad array of folks together on that team to start having these conversations together before we would even come and provide a training. And then step two, after the team is formed and talks through the training, we provide the training in person for justice professionals. And then lastly, provide that ongoing assistance as needed. So part of the training is creating an action plan that then we can provide support. And this really pinpoints issues that they're looking to change in the community. So for example, if law enforcement seem to be getting a lot of calls around certain individuals in the community, then, or maybe calls from group homes or other places where people with disabilities might live, they can talk through how they're going to address that in the future and make sure that everyone's on the same page around communication about that particular issue. So there have been different things that have come out as we've done these trainings throughout the country, where really the disability field's just not talking to those in the criminal justice world. And often we do use different terms and language, and we don't necessarily know how to talk to each other. So this is key in that process of creating those pathways to communication as well, before we can even start talking about how to change policy or what needs to happen within a law enforcement, a police department, or within a Rape Crisis Center, for example. All of this important work beforehand must happen before even a training can take place. So this is kind of an overview of that training. And this is a picture of a training that took place in Maryland, one of our first pilots of the Pathways to Justice training. This just gives you more information and a visual of who's involved in the disability response teams. And then this is an overview of the modules that are provided within the training itself. So we look at disability basics, kind of helping folks understand the culture within disability. Oops. We also look at providing training to law enforcement and victim service providers, as well as attorneys. And then how to develop a Pathways to Justice plan within that community. This is an example of our one of the fact sheets that we provide through the training. This one is for law enforcement specifically, but we also provide one for attorneys as well as victim service providers. And we also look at using the Pathways to Justice model here as we talk to different communities about where they are within the criminal justice system overall and what they really want to focus on in terms of providing education to different professionals in the system. We go through the steps of identification at each stage of the system, how to provide accommodations, and then what supports are needed in the community. So the impact of the Pathways to Justice training can be seen here. This is where you can see in orange is where we've provided training so far. We've established 15 disability response teams in 12 different states, and we continue to try to provide this training. But with COVID, of course, that really kind of stopped us for a while because all of the training so far has been in person. We are looking at different ways that we can provide this in a hybrid manner as well. But so far we have really kind of focused on helping create ways where people with disabilities can meet face-to-face with law enforcement and in situations that aren't high pressure, aren't dangerous, and aren't in a crisis. And that way we're hoping to establish real relationships and understanding between people with disabilities and law enforcement. So we've looked at ways to replicate this not only within the US, but also have taken it internationally as well. And we were part of the Zero project where we had a chance to meet with funders in Vienna. And this was back in 2019 to talk about the Pathways to Justice training and the model and how it might be replicated. So we looked at different ways that we might license the training, how to do a train the trainer model. And who we were focusing on really providing this to was through our state and local chapters, working with like-minded nonprofits in the US and in other countries. And so that leads me to invite you today as well. If you're interested in working with us or partnering in any way, we'd love to talk to you about really sharing our expertise internationally so that we can build, again, that credibility, the research base that we need to really show why this issue is so important. I wanted to mention some work that we're doing through the Open Society Foundations as well here in the US. We are working in what's called an Access to Justice Knowledge Hub. And some of the countries that have been represented there include Israel, Kenya, Mexico, South Africa, Spain, the UK, USA, and Zimbabwe. And through this, we're building knowledge through a variety of countries to disseminate tools and support solutions on the topic of people with disabilities in the criminal justice system. And the hub is broken down into different work streams. One includes looking at more crux legal issues. One is on international standard setting. One is about the Justice Intermediary Starter Kit, which is a very interesting kind of model itself, where they're providing information within courtrooms to ensure accessible communication. And I put a link about that here. And then lastly, reimagining community safety and policing. And that's the work stream that I'm coordinating through the hub. And we'll talk a little bit more about that here in a second. So the purpose of the hub is really to transform justice systems so that people with disabilities can participate equally and fairly. And that's through two key ways. One is to ensure equal opportunity to communicate, to be heard, and also to be understood, but also eliminating from that system exclusion from proceedings due to disability, and then eliminating alternatives to trial and detention, such as treatment or institutionalization, which are based on force, coercion, or findings of incapacity. So this is a pretty broad group looking at issues related to disability, both IDD, mental health disability, looking more broadly at disability and how people with disabilities are being excluded from the system, and making sure that we're creating an access to justice in that way. We're also looking at creating alternatives to criminal justice responses, which are based on the person's consent and full participation. And let me show you a little bit more about what we're doing, how we're doing that through the reimagining work stream. So through this work stream, we're looking at being able to collect and analyze different practices that help us reimagine the current justice system for persons with disabilities, but that also reflect the CRPD principles, so the Convention for Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And through that, what we'd like to do is create a way to discuss these issues or a discussion guide that will help us be able to talk through what exactly is safety, what is safety to people with disabilities in different countries, what does that look like, and how can we reimagine a different way of ensuring that people are safe within their communities. What we're currently working on is to be able to bring this discussion guide to an institute in July of this year. And we'll be going to the UK and Canterbury for the Institute for Fair Justice. And what's so exciting about this is the first year that we're able to include individuals who are coming for the first time to the group to really look at some of these issues from their vantage point within different countries. And some of the questions that we're looking at around the reimagining, as I mentioned before, include the following. And one of them is how safety is defined by communities and by different disability or law enforcement groups. What does safety look like? Also, how does police presence impact the perceived level of safety? What is and what should be the role of police from no involvement to more or complete involvement? And then the all-important question about who else besides police can or should be promoting safety in communities. And so with the new fellows coming to the Institute this year, we'll be able to really delve into some of those topics. And this is just some more information about the different countries that will be represented at the Institute. It was very important too that we focus on centering those with lived experience. So we have folks who have disabilities themselves, who may also be attorneys, people in different walks of life, experiencing disability, that are going to bring their own lived experience as well as expertise to this discussion. So that is something we're very excited about, and looking forward to where that information will lead us to next. But what you can do, so I always like to end on what can we do as individuals around this topic. So I like to encourage people to think about their own journey in this work and how they've been involved in criminal justice issues, kind of what got you started in this work, or how you came to be passionate about this area of advocacy, and think about the champions for justice who have inspired you. Think about how that can relate to ways that you can support research, policy, and programs that make lasting change. And so often, the funding streams or the opportunities we get around this are very short-lived. And so we have to think long-term about how we can create sustainable change for people with disabilities in the system. And that often comes through building strong collaborations with partners at community levels, at national and international levels, which is why it's so important that we're having this discussion today. And just remember that it's always important to stay as informed as possible and to be proactive in these areas. The more that we can focus on the prevention end of this, of course, the better. It's a lot easier said than done with how funding works in all of our countries. But the more that we can stay informed and be proactive, of course, the closer that we can get to our goals. So I wanted to leave you with my contact information here. My email is there, as well as the link to our National Center on Criminal Justice and Disability. And we have the link to Pathways to Justice as well. So thank you so much. I hope I stayed somewhat on time, and I don't know if there's any time for questions.
You did indeed. That was a really nice presentation. Thank you so much for that. And what a great one to finish with. And your last slide with what we can all do was really on point, because we can really all do something. And I think that's a very, very good note to finish 2 heavy days with, to ensure that that's actually what we take away. Because when we want to make change, many people together becomes a very powerful coalition. So if we all do things, change will happen. So absolutely. I think there wasn't really questions that I saw in the chat. There were comments, and they're very happy with the presentation. I have no questions in the Q&A. So I think you were so clear with everything that everyone is very happy.
It looks like there might be one.
Did I miss one?
I don't know. It might.
The last one from Ken.
Was it Ken?
Do you see any commonality crossover between the challenges those with ID face when interacting with the justice system and those with neurodiversity who may also be interacting with the justice system? Thank you, Ken.
I do think there's quite a bit of crossover in that. And also, another area where I've seen that occur is with the mental health disability. And I know we're using different terms depending on which country we're in. Yeah. But I think it is important to try to bring out where there are commonalities and to really focus in on that within our training. Yeah. But at the same time, understand the nuances of certain disabilities as well. And I do think that can be challenging because we do expect law enforcement to know a lot. We want them to be trained on many different things. But if we work together and we learn how to pinpoint maybe key issues within a crisis situation, or maybe key issues within a victim scenario, then it can help bring up similar challenges that people with disabilities may face more generally. But I think that's a great question, and it is one that we have struggled with, especially as we look at people with dual diagnosis, people who have both, and we know that that's more common in people with developmental disabilities. So that's a whole other issue too to consider. That's a great question.
But we have lots, and this is why we at the Institute of Neurodiversity want to try to collaborate with as many different groups as possible, so we can try to find universal tools, if you want, or universal solutions that broadens the space that we all live in. And whether in a former one, someone talked about look for sign for needs. As opposed to looking for what these people can't do, look for what is the need. So we can, and I think that could be like a universal list of signs of needs that should be part of training that people get aware of. Okay, we're trying to meet needs so that we get the best outcome in whichever situation we are in and whichever person we have in front of us. And I think if we all put our minds to it, I feel very sort of positive that there will be ways that we can put everybody under, not just like, oh, you're in this silo, you're in that silo, and you're in that silo. There are certain things that will make it easier for everyone. And if we start with that, I think we have already done a good job. Right?
In fact, one of the things we talk about in the training is looking at a person's functional needs versus diagnosis.
Yeah.
Because people can get hung up in the diagnosis and
very much so. I mean,
and think about, oh, I can't identify that. I'm not a doctor, or I can't. And it's like, well, no, it's more about what does a person need. So I'm so glad you brought that up, Charlotte. That's a key point, and it can sort of put us all in the same playing field.
Both people have that. So because I'm autistic, we have a lot of autism in the family, and there is some set ways people think. Firstly, it's like probably white men in technology. Well, it's not. But probably, you know, some people said, well, what's your special trick? Like Rain Man. Yeah, we are not Rain Man either. Or you don't look autistic. There isn't an autistic look.
Right.
So, you know what I mean? That those kind of things, we've got to scrap those things, and we've got to look for people's needs, and not what some narrative that someone has written about us that actually just doesn't fit. Because we're everywhere and we're everything. We can be tall and short and have brown eyes and blue eyes, and do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
but it's
absolutely.
like people don't think we can. We can be entry level, or we can be in boardrooms like I am. It's, you know, it really, we're everywhere. And once we can get that across a bit better, maybe what we are looking for solutions will change.
Right.
I could be wrong, but that's my thinking.
Right.
We'll see.
No, I agree. And it is hopeful. I think we need to end on a note of hope. When it is very challenging, this field, you know, and the more that we can think of the future and what could be, you know, the more hope that we have. Yeah,
that's right. Thank you so much for being with us today. I really appreciate that. Thank you so much to all our participants as well for being here with us. And this is the end of the 2 days conference. It's been a pleasure to see everything and hear everything that's been coming through. We have certainly learned a lot, so much that I'm almost not sure my mind can contain all of it, but we will have you know, availability for various slides and so forth that we can see, and all the videos will also be made available on various social media. So have a most lovely weekend, everyone, and go away and rest. Thank you very much.